Hello and a very warm welcome to today's talk. Today we're going to be investigating and analysing the chemtrail theory, something that's a very hot topic in places like Twitter and social media, something that's been on my mind now for over 20 years. It's a very controversial subject, and I have a guest with me today, a familiar face to viewers on this channel, who has over 40 years of flying experience as a commercial airline pilot. So chemtrails is the public name for geoengineering. Geoengineering covers two primary ideologies: carbon dioxide removal and solar radiation management and weather control. And it's the latter that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to play a very short video for you. Here we go.
Further, cooperative efforts between all the nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control.
Think about that kind of communication and think about the opportunity that will provide. It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Further.
So as you can see there, this is something that world leaders have been discussing for decades. I would suggest they've been talking about it for longer than the JFK and Lyndon Johnson presidency happened in the 1960s. In fact, there are patents available online that go back over 100 years for weather manipulation and cloud seeding. So I'm going to read you a short poem by Alan Watt, whose website Cutting Through the Matrix is still available online. Sadly, he passed away 4 years ago, but he was a huge influence on me, as is today's guest, and spoke on many occasions about geoengineering. So this is his poem. They are the rats called technocrats, and they say, no need to tell the public, while for years they spray. When they say they may do, it's already done. Spraying sky for years, pretending it's to come. Studies say it's dangerous, but good for vegetation. Harmful effects like human deaths helps depopulation. Public kept in trained reality by PR versatility. Media handles updates, ensuring flexibility. World War, Cold War, terror, and now it's the planet. Oligarchical collectivism run by those who planned it. Wars are not meant to be won, they're meant to go on forever. With war upon our minds, our reasoning they sever. They plan ongoing realities pulled from bag of tricks. No reprieve from what most will believe in this matrix. So a great poem there from Alan Watt on today's subject. And I'm now going to read a brief testimony from Alan Buckman, a retired US Air Force meteorologist and wildlife biologist. Despite media failure to disclose and government disinformation to the contrary, there is and has been a weather modification program in full operation for many years. The high, thin cirrus that jets have been spreading across the sky, that the public has clearly seen as long trails of jet exhaust and spray turning into clouds and haze, can and is changing the weather. There are clouds now that have never existed before. The cloud nuclei being used are composed of metallic salts in nano form, all potentially toxic to life as we know it. We have documented accumulations of aluminium, strontium, barium, and many others in the soil, the rainwater, snow, and plants at levels thousands of times higher than any normal condition, and many should not be present at all. So let's hear what our guest has to say on that. Hello, Ralph. How are you doing?
Not so bad. Good to be
Good.
back with you again, Paul. Yes, in
Good.
slightly different topic, but never mind. We shall.
It is.
persevere.
It is. But it's something that's fascinated me now for over 20 years. A short anecdote for you. I remember first hearing about this through the writer of that poem, Alan Watt. But it triggered, when I first heard about it, it triggered a memory that I had from probably somewhere in the late 90s, driving back from work one day. And I just happened to notice out of my window a trail that pretty much went from one end of the horizon to the other. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, God, that's a really long trail. I don't remember seeing a trail that long before. That's a bit unusual. What's going on there? So, as I say, it's a very hot topic. I think you mentioned in our previous video that it's one of the most discussed subjects on X at the moment, on Twitter.
It does seem
So,
like
yeah, and I mean, I would also add, before we get going, before we look to the skies on this subject, the powers that be, we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen some medical interventions that have resulted possibly in excess deaths all over the globe. We've got toxins in the food supply. There's no doubt about that at all, as far as I'm concerned. We have sodium fluoride and chlorine, winner of Gas of the Year 1914, in the tap water, along with everyone's medications. Aluminium sulfate is put into the water, and that's the only reason why it appears as clear as it does. We've got pharmaceutical drugs that destroy gut health and often come with serious side effects. We've got traditional family values that have been destroyed for the last, I don't know, 60 years or something. That's still on the go and exacerbating. So the powers that be would seem have some form when it comes to making our lives extremely difficult and challenging. So I'll
well,
give
that's
you
the problem. That's the problem, isn't it? Nobody trusts their leaders and governments anymore, and they are their own worst enemy in that fashion. They have lied to us about COVID. They've lied to us about vaccines. They've lied to us about masks for the last 3 years, and that's on top of all of the other lies, like the weapons of mass destruction and all the rest of the stuff they keep lying about. And so there is a general distrust of the government, and that pertains, I think, to all governments around the world. I don't think Britain is any worse than any other Western nation, and I think the Eastern nations are even worse. They never tell the truth. So what do people do? And the other problem, of course, is we've got incompetent politicians anyway. For a long time, I've said that there should be an entrance examination into Parliament. You cannot have the nation run by people who cannot run a sweet shop. And quite demonstrably, many of them should not be in charge of a sweet shop. So why are they in charge of the country? That again is a problem, that nobody trusts the governments. And then there could be, I'll just put this out there before we start, there could almost be a psyops working here, because flat earthing and chemtrailing is a very nice way of killing any opposition to any what people are saying is conspiracies. So if you don't go along with the wet market explanation for a particular disease, then you're a flat earther, you're a chemtrailer, and they can ridicule and squash you, and your views are rendered worthless. That's pretty much what they've been doing. Now, whether that is by design or by default, I don't really know, but it is convenient, you might say, for governments in order to stop discussion. He's just a flat earther.
Okay, Ralph. So I would definitely agree with you there on the flat earth psyop, and I can see how that would disrupt and discredit the truth of movement, for want of a better word or expression. With the chemtrail theory, as I've stated, I was a believer for many years. I thought that there was something going on. There are so many. I've been researching this subject. There are so many patents out there for weather manipulation and control. That's official. We know through disclosed government files that they experimented in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War, with weather warfare. They flooded the Ho Chi Minh Trail as part of their tactics in the war. So it would seem that there are technologies available for geoengineering. And of course, we've had Bill Gates recently putting out the idea that they could possibly block out or reflect the sunlight back out into space using various salts and different metallic particles. So the idea has definitely been put out there in the mainstream. There's no question about that at all. It's a question of whether or not they've already been doing it, and now they're just kind of putting the idea out there. So what would you say about that?
Yes, well, I mean, with this green movement, there are many big ideas and many fantasies, and this is just one of them. There's a truism about the green philosophy in that no prediction they've ever made has ever come true, and no technology they have created has ever worked properly. So yes, it's full of fantasies. I mean, for instance, to control the weather, at present, we are planning on getting all of our energy from the weather. That is how powerful the weather is, that we want to power the whole of civilization through the weather. So can we influence that weather when it's so powerful it can run the whole of civilization for the whole world? I very much doubt it. And the trouble is the methodologies that they are giving us just don't make any sense from my point of view. You know, I've had 40 years in the aviation industry, and what they're saying about commercial aviation is simply not true. So I thought we would start by having a quick look at an aircraft.
Certainly.
So hopefully that will be coming up with some sort of screen share.
Here we are.
There we go. So I'll make that a little bit bigger. This is a 737. I've only put that up because I'm fairly familiar with this aircraft. So I've flown this aircraft for 30 years. It's a passenger carrying aircraft. And the problem is that when people want to say that all of the trails they see in the sky above are due to some nefarious action spraying various chemicals, the problem is that's simply not possible within commercial aviation. And it's pretty much not possible even with military aviation. But when you look to the skies, 95%, 98% of the aircraft you see in the sky are commercial. Because the air forces are not that big, especially in Europe, we have very, very small air forces. They have a very small number of aircraft in comparison with commercial aviation. So this is a 737. This is the NG series. And there's no room on this aircraft to fit anything that would be remotely workable and possible for spraying in the high altitudes. So obviously the main passenger deck, which people are familiar with, underneath that we've got baggage holds, and then we've got fuel in the wings, and pretty much every inch of space is used on these aircraft. So these are the baggage holds. People probably don't go and see the baggage holds, but anyway, this is the baggage hold in the back of the 737 looking forward, and it conforms to the shape of the fuselage, of course, and it's just full of baggage. That's where they literally throw your baggage. It all goes in there. Yeah, there's nothing very sophisticated about a 737. And that forward bulkhead you see there, that is the fuel tank and the undercarriage bay, which we will look at in a minute. So there is no room behind that bulkhead for anything else. This is the forward hold looking backwards, and again it's very similar, a bit smaller of course, and again that bulkhead you can see is the fuel tank and the undercarriage bay behind. So there is no room underneath the aircraft for anything to be there. This is the undercarriage bay. As you can see, it's just jam-packed with mostly hydraulics. All of those pipes are pretty much hydraulics. It's got the flight controls, all of the cables. The 737 is still the original fly-by-wire, you might call it. It's fly-by 5mm steel cables, basically. It's a very old design. And so, yeah, there's no room there. And the bit you see above, there's a tank there. That's the center tank for the fuel. And the wheels just go up into those holes. So this big hole here is to carry the wheels when the wheels go up. Here's another look at it. Again, it's mostly hydraulics, electrics, a little bit of air conditioning on the front side of it, and flight controls. All of these up the top here are flight control systems. So no particular room there for any extra tankage. And then we go into the wing. This is inside the wing. So the top of here is the wing skin on the top of the wing where you see the wing from the passenger windows, and the bottom is the bottom of the wing. This is actually the wing box structure. And all of this is full of fuel from bottom to top. It's just completely full of fuel. That's why the guy's got a mask on. So he's doing some work on the fuel tank, and obviously he has to have a mask on because it's still got remnants of fumes in there from the fuel. So that's the aircraft. They are fully used. And if you look at the back of the wing, this is the center of the wing. This is the wing box. If you look at the back of the wing, there's nothing in there. It's empty. As you can see, there's just a big empty space. And the space is there for the flaps to tuck up into when you're flying at speed, of course. The flaps have to go somewhere, and they tuck themselves up into that space behind the wing. And that's just a general look at the 737. It's just a bog standard aircraft, really. And everything that goes on this aircraft goes on to the load and balance sheet, sometimes called the trim sheet. So everything that we carry on an aircraft has to be on the load sheet, because your loading has to be correct. You cannot be too heavy. And your trim has to be correct. So you cannot hold, spare tankage in the tail of the aircraft, because you'll be out of trim and the aircraft won't take off. It'll tip up or it'll tip down depending on where you've loaded the extra materials. So, and as you see, this load sheet has got everything on it. So we've got the cockpit and crew. Even the crew have to go down as a separate amount of weight, for each of the pilots and the cabin staff, cabin crew and bags. I don't know if you can see my cursor up the top here on the left.
Yep.
Takeoff fuel. So all of the fuel has to be noted, and in which tanks they are as well, because there's 3 tanks on a 737. And then we've got passenger weights down here, and that's always been a problem because passengers are getting heavier and heavier, of course, and that's not necessarily reflected in the weights they give us. So, the average weight they give us is 84 kilos. And of course, the average weight now of many people is much above 84 kilos. And that 84 kilos includes 7 kilos of baggage as well. and that's the average between men and women. So with all of the, if you go to America with the obese people over in America, the aircraft can actually be substantially overweight if you're carrying a load of obese people. But anyway, their weights all go down in here. And then you put them all down here, and you've got your zero fuel weight, you've got your takeoff weight, and down the bottom you've got your landing weights. And then you go over to this side of this sheet, and now we have to do the trim or the balance to make sure we're in balance. Obviously, the center of gravity of the aircraft has to be over the wings. If it's not, you're going to crash. So all of the weights go down here, and you put them down, and the weights go from side to side on this trim sheet. And then you end up at the bottom here with, and I've marked it here in purple, with some sample takeoff and landing weights. So wherever you are, you've got to be in this box, this sort of triangular box. You've got to be inside there with your weight and your balance. If you're not, you will crash. So you can see all of this is pretty important, and you can't be just having spare tankage and spare spray gear and so on a commercial aircraft, because everything has to be on the trim sheet. You can't have people nefariously topping up secret tanks that nobody knows about. And of course, every aircraft each morning will be visited by 2 or 3 engineers, a couple of pilots, all of the ground staff. So you've got the baggage loaders, you've got the people who load up the potable water, the toilets, the fuel. All of those people visit the aircraft, and all of those people will be familiar with aircraft, and they will know if there's something not right with it, i.e. if there's spray booms poking out the back of it or something daft like that, or a spare tank that shouldn't be in there, because they're opening up these holes, they're looking inside, especially the engineers. They're even looking in the tail for the APU in the tail and so on, and the electronics bay in the front of the aircraft. These aircraft are inspected by hundreds of people every month, different people, all around the world or all around Europe, because, when you land in Spain, you'll get a Spanish engineer and Spanish ground crew. So you'll get people from all over the world looking at these aircraft every day they fly, including the pilots who have to do an inspection. And the pilots have to know every nut and bolt on the aircraft. So if there's something not quite right, then the pilot should know about it. And this is the aircraft I flew. This is one of them. This was a freighter, of course, so no passengers in this one. It's just got a big door in the front. And that's how you load up a freighter aircraft. You just throw these big bins in the front. And again, they have to be in the correct location, because if you get too heavy a bin down the back of the aircraft, again, you're going to crash on takeoff. So yeah, all of this has to be very tightly regulated. There's yours truly.
Hey.
Sitting in front of the aircraft, and you can see these are white tails. People keep saying, oh yeah, we've got these unregistered white tail aircraft. Well, here's one. I used to fly one of these white tails with no identification on it. They do exist. And the reason they exist is because they don't want to spend money painting them. What's the point, It's a dirty old freighter. Nobody wants to paint the thing. And I'm guessing, but how much is it going to cost you to paint an aircraft? 100,000? Well, nobody wants to spend that sort of money. So it's just a whitetail. And they fly every night. There are loads of them flying every night. Here's yours truly, up at 35,000 feet, dashing across Europe. And yeah, I've got 20,000 hours in these aircraft. I think I know what I'm... Unlike the gormless Gnostic who tried to challenge me on a topic of aviation, I've got 20,000 hours in these aircraft. I think I know what I'm talking about, unlike the gormless Gnostic. So I thought I would go through. So that's the aircraft. It's virtually impossible to have any additional equipment on an aircraft that can't be spotted. Certainly in commercial aviation and military aircraft. I've been on military aircraft as well. There is nothing there.
I was sorry, Ralph. I was going to actually bring up military aircraft because I think you've certainly convinced me that commercial airlines can't be involved in this conspiracy theory. That's pretty much done now. But could it be that there's specific military aircraft that are doing the spraying?
Well, there could be military aircraft. I mean, it's not impossible, but all of the aircraft that people are seeing in the sky every day, they are commercial aircraft. I mean, we have so few, because we know all of the military aircraft as they're flying past. We can see them. You can see the individual aircraft as they fly by you. You can pick out which operator, it's TUI, it's Air Tours, it's British Airways, it's Lufthansa. You can see all the aircraft as they pass you, and they all have their call signs which correspond, because we can see them on TCAS as well, the airborne radar system. The number of military aircraft that we have flying up at these altitudes is very small. And again, they have their own call signs. They will be Reach, for instance, or Ascot, and they will be a military aircraft. But the number you see flying, very, very small. And again, they are notified by their registration and their call signs, and you can see them as they pass by, but you don't see very many of them. What people are looking at is, what should we start with first? Should we start with, let's start with weather patterns, because people look up at the sky and they see weather patterns and they're unfamiliar with them because it's not a part of, you're working in an office in London or something, you're not looking at the sky every 2 minutes. Whereas my job was looking at the sky. For 40 years, I sat and looked at the sky. I mean, there's nothing else to do. As you can see, sitting in this seat, what else is there to do? You either read a newspaper or look at the sky, sort of thing, because there's precious little to do in the cruise apart from monitor a few instruments. And that is very difficult if you're not doing something else. I mean, if someone said to you, you've got to sit down in front of your television and watch that television for 6 hours, and you're not watching a film, it's just the test card and music, if people remember what that is. You've got to sit and look at the test card and music for 6 hours. Well, that's pretty much impossible, isn't it? You're going to fall asleep after the first 5 minutes. So you've got to keep yourself occupied. And what do? Well, you either you do some reading, you can read some manuals, you might read a newspaper, or you look outside and have a look at what's going on around the world.
Could you write a book?
It's possible you could, I suppose.
I was thinking about you. Did you write any of your books or work on your books while you were piloting?
I certainly did an amount of reading, yes. So we were allowed to read as long as the other pilot was looking out, etc. So we used to take turns at it. Nothing special, because nothing really happens up there at 35,000 foot. We're in contact with air traffic. Air traffic is telling us where everything else is, and we can see them on TCAS as well. So we've got a radar type system which tells us where all of the other aircraft are, and we can monitor them as they go across the screen, sort of thing. Well, I suppose we might as well look at what these look like. This is the old-fashioned 200 series 737. 737 is an ancient aircraft, which is why I don't think the new 737 MAX should be flying, because it's a 1967 aircraft. In fact, it's earlier than that. It's a 1950s aircraft, because it started as the 707, and then they made it smaller and put 2 engines on it and called it the 737. And this is the cockpit from the 737 200 series. So this goes back to 1967, this aircraft. And then it became the NG. And nothing really changed, really. Especially if you look at the upper panel. Have a look at the upper panel on this, and no, it's exactly the same. So they didn't really change much. The only thing that really happened with the NG series for the cockpit is you got the glass screens. So you've now got a glass screen, and that can obviously show you the other aircraft flying across your path with a sort of radar system. It's called TCAS. But yeah, it's an old-fashioned aircraft. It's still cable controlled, just like flying a Cessna. It's got big cables that run out to all the control surfaces. And this is the new Max. And again, if you look at the upper panel, nothing has changed. It's exactly the same. The controls and everything, the systems, the hydraulics, the electrics, are pretty much exactly the same. Nothing has really changed. It's a 50-year-old aircraft by now. No, more than that, 55 years old.
So why are we still using aircraft that's that old? That seems a bit strange.
Because it's cheap.
Silly me.
It all comes down to money. Follow the money.
Yes.
Dear old Boeing thought they would go for a cheap option instead of the right option. Now they're in competition with Airbus, as everybody knows. Airbus came out with a new type of aircraft with bigger engines on it, but Airbus had an advantage because their aircraft was already bigger. It was taller. It had longer undercarriage, so it could accept these bigger engines fairly easily. And so they put it on and they called it the A320neo. Now, that upset Boeing. They got a bit worried by this because it was going to be more efficient. So they said, what are we going to do? Are we going to do the right thing and redesign a completely new, brand new aircraft to compete with Airbus? Or are we going to go down the cheap route and just update the aircraft we've got? And they said, well, we'll go down the cheap route and we'll just update the 737 yet again for the fourth time, a new variant coming out 50 years after the first variant, So this is the same aircraft 50 years later and they're still making it. And it was the wrong decision. That's why they had those two crashes, of course, with the Max series. It was caused because it was based on this old design. And the old design could not accept these big engines. And that caused problems with the weight and balance and the air loads on the engines. And that's why they ended up with this strange MECAS system that everyone was talking about. We can go into that later, but we don't need to go into it now. But suffice to say, if you're just updating an old aircraft, it's going to be a compromise. Because you're not designing in this new system, you're putting it on an old system. And that's why it didn't work. So, yeah, they made the wrong decision. The Max should never have been made. They should have spent the money. And by the time they've already spent, because they had so many problems with making the Max, by the time they actually got it going, they could have had a brand new aircraft out. They could have had a proper brand new aircraft, but they went for the cheap option.
I should just add, Ralph, at this point, as speaking as someone who's a nervous flyer, you're not making this any easier for me.
No, well, there's several people have said that about the Max. It undermines confidence when airline manufacturers do things like this. Aviation is all about confidence. And if someone undermines that confidence, it's very, very difficult to get that confidence back again. Because it is a confidence issue. When you look out on the wing and you see Rolls-Royce logo there, you feel happy and confident because they've had a good reputation. Now, it doesn't take many crashes to undermine that reputation. So manufacturers like Rolls-Royce and the other aero engine manufacturers have got to be on top of their game. Otherwise, they will lose it very quickly. Rolls-Royce have got, 100 years of expertise behind them. you could lose that in 2 or 3 years if you bring out a nail of an engine that doesn't work, you know. So everything hangs on the last 2 or 3 years, not necessarily on the 100 years that have gone previously. So yeah, when you're in charge of these important manufacturing businesses, you've got to stay on top of your game. If you take your eye off the game and you start going for profit, which is what Boeing was doing, they had a big drive for profit because they wanted to keep their shareholders happy, and that big drive for profit undermined the manufacturing and the safety culture within Boeing. Yeah, but that's a bit a different sort of different topic. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what are we looking at here, Ralph?
Yeah, this is looking at clouds. Now, I had a quick dig into chemtrailing, and a lot of the evidence I saw, evidence in inverted commas, was a misidentification of cloud forms because people don't understand the weather. They don't look at the weather very often. And they'll look at something like this and they'll say, well, that's, that looks man-made. All of these stacks of clouds put upon one on top of another. But no, this is just wave clouds. So this is wave clouds coming off a mountain. So to the left-hand side of this picture, there will probably be a large set of mountains, and the wind goes over the mountains, drops down the other side of the mountain, and starts bouncing. And when it bounces, at the top of the bounce, it will condense into clouds, and it will form these big platters, you might call them, of wave clouds. So this is perfectly natural. This is just wave clouds. And you do see them all the time if you're in mountainous regions. Well, it doesn't even have to be hugely mountainous. You can do them. You can get wave from fairly small hills sometimes, but not as high as this. It's pretty high. You probably find this is up at 10,000 to 20,000 foot. So this is quite high. And you need a reasonably high mountain to set that off. Well, that's not entirely true. You can get clouds like this off the Welsh Hills, and the Welsh Hills only go up to like 1,500 foot. So you can actually start the air bouncing with a relatively small hill. These patterns are often mistaken for chemtrails, although this is fairly overcast, so you wouldn't really mistake this. This is either a wave pattern again, but a much smaller wave pattern than we saw before. Or perhaps this is interference wave. Myself, I would imagine this is actually wave coming off a hillside rather than interference wave. We'll see interference wave later on. But you do get these stripy patterns that run across the sky. These are always interesting. I mean, people think this has got to be, something to do with man-made. This is just mamma, mamma as in breasts hanging down. And this is indicative of thunderstorms. Thunderstorms have enormous rising air columns that power the thunderstorm. But of course, if you get enormous rising air columns, there must be air coming down somewhere else. And so at the bottom of the thunderstorm, quite often you get these dollops of cloud which are pushed downwards by descending air coming down out of the thunderstorm. And you end up with these strange patterns. And here's some more. You can see mamma hanging down from this thunderstorm. I'm not sure which airport that is. Don't know where that is. But that's fairly typical of mamma hanging down. And here's 3 other images. Actually, this is a stitch. This is a camera taking 3 shots all across the sky. so you can stitch them together. Again, of this mama hanging down underneath a thunderstorm. So yeah, quite dramatic. If you see one of these for real, it's quite dramatic. I've only seen this about twice in 40 years, so it doesn't occur. If you lived out in the plains of North America, you might see this more often, but you don't see it so often in Britain. These are mare's tails. Again, this is mistaken for chemtrailing sometimes. Chemtrailing. This is just stratus from above, which is descending into a faster airstream down below. And the faster airstream down below whips these clouds along, and you end up with these mare's tails. And this is quite a common feature. You often see these. This is another type where the clouds are descending into a lower airstream, because remember that the atmosphere is not one block of air just moving along. Very often it's composed of many different layers, and those layers can run in different directions and different air speeds. And so this is clouds, virga we call it, which is rain that doesn't reach the ground, dropping into a faster airstream and getting whipped away from these clouds underneath. And you end up with these strange shapes. And here's some more of it. There we go. Getting whisked away by the lower airstream. And then you end up with things like this.
Wow.
And people say, well, this is, it's got to be man-made, isn't it? This is a soliton or a roll cloud. And these are complex. These have been known about for quite some time, but they weren't really fully explained until I think the 1990s or something, when people started investigating these. And it's the result of a sea breeze front. So, and you normally get these in the morning, which is why some people call them a morning glory. During the night, you'll get a land breeze where the wind comes from the land and it goes out to sea. So this is a coastal effect. You only really see these next to a coast. So at night, you'll get a land breeze, which goes out to sea. And then the air is rising over the sea. Now in the morning, that collapses and it turns into a sea breeze, which, if you've been to the coast, you will have felt a sea breeze when in the mid-morning, suddenly the breeze sets up from the sea and you get sandblasted because it can be quite strong. And the temperature changes very quickly because during the day, the sea feels much cooler than the land. But the reverse is true overnight. The land is cooler than the sea. So in the morning, the land breeze collapses. And as it collapses, that cold air comes down and moves inland and finds colder air over the land, because remember, the land is still awakening from the night, as it were, and it's still quite cold. And that air, which has come off the sea, is warmer than the land air, and it flows upwards over the cold air and condenses in a big long line along the coast. And that's why you get these, normally a soliton, just a single roll cloud just sitting there, but sometimes you get multiple ones. Now this is the Gulf of Carpentaria. This is up in Queensland, Australia, and it's famed up there for having these roll clouds in the morning. And you can see it's the morning because the clouds are displaced the shadow is displaced from the cloud quite a lot. And these look very strange. They look as though they're man-made, but they're not. They're just coastal features. You really only see these in coastal locations, and they're not to be confused with any geo-engineering. This is strato Q. This is an interference pattern. So this is not wave cloud like we saw before. This is normally set up because you've got two layers of air which are running at different airspeeds or different directions. It doesn't have to be much. One airstream is like 20 degrees different to the upper airstream. And where they meet, you get this interference pattern between these two layers of air. And it sets up these ripples in the sky, the same as you would see perhaps on a river. A river flowing down, you will get ripples running down that river because of the rocks underneath it or whatever. And the air does the same. It's a fluid, and it sets up these strange patterns. And some of these patterns can be interesting. Here's a good one. Now you've got 3 possibilities with this. It could be a wave formation. I don't think it is, because a wave formation is normally smoother than this. This is made of strata Q, cumulus clouds. So this is either an interference pattern, or more likely it is streeting. So when you get thermic clouds, a standard thermal going up with a nice little puffy cumulus cloud on the top, they often street. They go in a long line together, and then you can get rows of these long lines all going down together. Loved by glider pilots, because if you get under one of these streets, it will be uplift all the way down. So you can glide for miles and miles and miles without bothering to turn, because you're in uplift all the way. And the down bit is in the blue bits in between. So I would say this is probably streeting. But an interesting street, because normally the cumulus are bigger than this. These are quite small little cumulus. Here's some more interesting clouds. Again, I would say this is probably interference wave. It's too small for wave off a mountain or a hill. I mean, it could be, but the wavelength between each wave looks too small for me for a wave pattern. So this is probably interference wave between two airstreams at different altitudes that are traveling in different directions. And these are quite common. You quite often see these. All very interesting. There's whole websites devoted to cloud formations, if people are interested in cloud formations. Here's an interesting one. We've got a lower stratus cloud that is poking up into a faster airstream above it, and that faster airstream is folding over the tops because it's blowing them away basically, and you get these strange curlovers. These are interesting. These are noctoluminescent sort of clouds. People mistake this for chemicals in the sky. This is just a rainbow basically. It's an ice rainbow. So this is probably high level cloud. This is high level stratus, and it's catching the evening sun or the morning sun. I'm not sure if this is morning or evening, but the sun is just coming up over the horizon, and it's refracting the sun's rays just the same as a rainbow will do. But this is a high level rainbow way up in the stratosphere, I'd imagine. And these are fairly common. You get the rainbow patterns from the sun. This one's on top of a thunderstorm, so you've got a little bit of cirrus coming up off the top of a thunderstorm, and it's catching the sun that's behind it and turning it into a rainbow, which is all very interesting. It always looks nice. These are nice. This is you can see these in temperate climates. It's called a false sun. So you'll see 2 or 3 suns. You can see it as a matter of like a cloud, like a rainbow refracting the sun. But this is ice. So it looks a little bit different. So this is ice that's refracting the sun, because you've got stagnant ice that's just sitting in the atmosphere. If you go to these, I did a lot of flying up in Finland and northern Norway and so on, and during the winter there, you will get little tiny ice crystals. I mean, each crystal is only a millimeter long, and they're so light they just hang there in the sky, and they don't even settle down. But of course, because they're there in the sky, they can refract the sun just the same as a rainbow will. Obviously, a rainbow.
Very, very interesting. Sorry to interrupt. I've seen
Mm,
videos on this, and even one or two in which somebody's got a certain camera, and they can pick these tiny particles up on the camera. But they're
mm.
kind of insinuating that these particles are nanoparticles, and it's proof of geoengineering.
No, it's ice particles. I mean, you can actually catch them in your glove and breathe on them, and of course they melt because they're made of ice.
Mm.
Um, they're just so small that they won't settle out very easily from the atmosphere. Um, Remember, there's lots of moisture. Well, not so much moisture in this atmosphere because it's very cold, of course. But during the day, there is moisture in the atmosphere. And then it cools down very rapidly, of course, as the sun goes down overnight. And some of that moisture will condense out. But instead of condensing out as mist or fog, which is what we would see, it's so cold there, it condenses out as ice crystals. And you get
Mm.
these little ice crystals, of course.
Mm.
Um, and you can sort of wave your glove around sometimes and catch a few of these ice crystals
Mm.
on your glove. Here's another one. This is the full double rainbow you get. This is an ice rainbow. Now, I'm familiar with this because often you'll see this up at altitude. Up at altitude. So if you're up at 35,000 foot, where again the temperature is very cold. Remember, at 35,000 foot, it's 2 degrees per thousand foot is the decrease in temperature average.
Mm.
So 35, that's 70 minus the normal temperature on the ground of 20. So you'll be minus 50, minus 55 degrees centigrade.
Pretty chilly.
Yeah, and that's on a normal day, not a winter's day. It'll get even colder on a winter's day. So you will find these effects up at 35,000 foot sometimes, if there is enough moisture up there, because obviously it's quite dry when you're in the high stratosphere. And you will see these, which is, a full double ice rainbow. And again, this is ice, this is not water. And it's the ice crystals that are refracting the sun. So you'll get different angles. Obviously, if this was a water rainbow, you get a certain angle. I forget what it is. It's something like 43 degrees or something that it will refract the sun. But these are ice crystals, and so you have a different angle. And that's why you can get these tighter, smaller looking rainbows, whereas a normal rainbow would be, very big, of course. And these are smaller because of the refraction angle. Going into what people consider to be chemtrails, but are actually contrails. This is what they're seeing. Now, this is a standard condensation trail from an aircraft, and they will spread out depending on the humidity of the air at altitude at this moment in time. Because, of course, you don't always get contrails. It depends on the temperature and the humidity of the air,
I was,
which is,
yeah, sorry, Ralph. I was just
yeah,
going to briefly interrupt on that point,
yeah, sure.
because some of the conspiracy theorists that talk about chemtrails are putting forward the idea that most modern jet engines are nearly incapable of producing condensation trails except under the most extreme conditions.
Yeah, I've heard this said. They said they're so efficient that they won't produce contrails.
Hmm.
Well, the combustion products of burning diesel, because basically aircraft burn diesel, the combustion products are water, CO2, and a little tiny bit of carbon monoxide.
Hmm.
And that water comes out the back of the aircraft. That's what you're burning. So your fuel is mixed with oxygen, burnt, and out the back of the engine comes water. That's what you will see on And I think I've got a picture here somewhere. Somewhere I'm looking for a picture of a car, because I did upload one. There we go. That's what you'll see out the back of your car, because your car is burning diesel or petrol, and the combustion products are water and CO2. And you don't normally see it, of course, because the air is that dry that it immediately evaporates. But if you have, and you'll probably know this from your car, a cold, humid morning, which is on the verge of producing mist or fog anyway, then it persists, and you can see a great white cloud coming out of the back of your car. That's just standard water vapor. And that is what you see in the air. And the rate at which it disappears will depend on the humidity. And to get the humidity, you need one of these, which is a T5gram or a skew-5gram. This is a slice through the atmosphere. And as meteorologists and pilots, we're supposed to understand all of this. And you've got temperature and humidity. Now, where these two lines, so here in the center at about the 600 millibar level, it's very dry. There's a big difference between the green line and the red line. But where they touch, like down the bottom, this is at surface level. Because they're touching, there will be fog on the ground, because temperature and humidity are the same. And then up at the top here, where they're close together again, there is a likelihood of upper level stratus in the upper atmosphere. This is at the 400 millibars level. So that relative humidity will change every day. Every day is different. And if you have a dry day, you'll get no contrailing. If you have a moist day, a humid day, you will get contrailing, and they will persist. Because remember, it comes out the back of the engine as water. Now, it can survive as water down to about minus 40 degrees centigrade. So water does not freeze until about minus 40 degrees centigrade. We call it supercooled water. And it needs a disturbance in order to make it freeze. And it will naturally stay as water for quite a considerable amount of time. And then it will freeze. And then you get ice crystals. So most of these will probably be ice crystals at this altitude. And they will persist.
Sorry, Ralph, just one quick question here. So many people who believe in the chemtrail conspiracy will say that when they were a child, they do not remember these long trails. They'll say we can remember condensation trails, that it may be no more than 10 lengths of the plane coming out of the back, but that the long trails that we see today, some of which go from one end of the horizon to the other, we don't remember these in the 70s or 80s. They didn't exist, they say.
Yes, well, that is actually true. And the reason that is true is because the amount of aviation has increased dramatically. So when I was young, most of the aircraft in Europe were prop aircraft, turboprops, and they were small. And they didn't actually get very high. Most turboprops are only working up to 20,000 foot on European routes, because there's no point in them going any higher. They don't actually get that much more efficient if they go higher. And most of them are rated only to low levels anyway. The ATP aircraft, which doesn't fly very often now, is a twin turboprop with about 70 passengers on board, which I had the misfortune of flying because it wasn't a very good aircraft. That aircraft was certified to 25,000 foot. So it would never get up into the contrailing regions anyway. But full of passengers, you couldn't get the thing beyond 15,000 foot. That was full throttle altitude. It wouldn't go any higher.
Wow.
So you're not going to get any contrails out of these early props. Now, of course, even within Europe, we get heavy big jets. Sometimes you jump on to go down to Spain, and it's no longer a turboprop or a 111 or a 146 or whatever, which are fairly small aircraft with 100 passengers on board. Now it's a big Airbus with 350 people on board. And they will go up much higher. And of course, a lot of these aircraft are now being certified to higher and higher levels. The contrailing region is really only above 25,000 foot. So say from 25,000 foot up to 40,000 foot. Below 25, you're not going to get any contrails. And above 40,000 foot, it's probably too dry. You're not going to get contrails again. But on any one contrailing day, the contrailing thickness block of air is probably only a 5,000 foot thick. So you'll see some aircraft contrailing and others not contrailing. Now, that doesn't mean that some aircraft are spraying and some are not. It just means that one is higher or lower than the other one. And so one is in the contrailing region and the other one is not. The other common thing is sometimes you'll see them turning on and off. So the contrail will be intermittent. Well, that's only because you're flying through something like this. Okay, this is fairly low down, but if you can imagine this up in the stratosphere, you will get wave type blocks of air in the stratosphere, which are waving like this. Now, just because you can't see the clouds doesn't mean it's not waving. But you imagine an aircraft flying through an area like this, and you've got humid air, dry air, humid air, dry air, humid air, dry air. So as the aircraft flies through it, the contrail will last and dissipate, last and dissipate. And so you'll get dashes, basically, of contrailing.
Yes, I've seen videos of this, and this is something else that people point to and say that this is absolutely undeniable proof of chemtrails.
Yeah. No, it's just you're flying through different humidity air.
Wow.
As you go through these wave patterns. Again, it's because people. I'm surprised when you get people, as you quoted this guy that came out of the Air Force who's supposed to be a weather forecaster or something. I would imagine either they're making up their qualifications or they're being deliberately deceitful, and I don't know why they would do that. But I would suspect the former, because someone sent to me, because obviously I've been looking into this to revise for this video. Someone sent to me a tape recording of a commercial pilot talking about actually chemtrailing himself with the tanks, with the spray gear and spraying. But when you listen to him as a pilot, this guy was not a commercial pilot. Everything he was saying was totally non-aviation. I mean, it would be like, I don't know, a city dweller talking about, farming cows or something. They would have no idea as to the standard terminology that farmers use. And this guy had no idea about the standard phraseology we use in aviation. So he was clearly not a pilot. But he was masquerading as a pilot because then he could say, yeah, I was chemtrailing. Yeah, sure you were. This is another one, and you get these crisscross patterns. We're working up to the ultimate crisscross because you get them like this. And this is one of the things that these people say is, look, they're spraying in patterns and you get these crosshatch patterns. This is sure sign of chemtrailing, because they're obviously spraying to get, a nice spread of spray across the sky. No, what's happening here is this is wind. So I've done a little diagram here. So So we've got two aircraft here on two airways. Remember, airways are fixed points above the ground. So you will always fly over the same town, the same countryside all the time, because they're fixed terrestrially by radio beacons normally. Well, nowadays we go on GPS, but anyway, previously it was on radio beacons. So we've got one aircraft here flying on this red dashed line going up to the top right, and we've got another aircraft on this red dashed line going up to the top left, and they are contrailing, and you can see the purple contrails coming out the back. So these two here are the fresh contrails that have just been issued by these aircraft. Now you've got the wind, you've got the big wind arrows above. Now this contrail, after 5 or 10 minutes, even 5 minutes is enough, because some of these upper winds are very strong. This contrail will suddenly move down to here and become this contrail. And then after another 5 minutes, it will move down here to this contrail. And likewise, this one, after 5 or 10 minutes, it will move down here, because it's moving with the wind. It'll move from there down to there. And it will now sit in that position. And then after another 10 minutes, it will sit in that position. And by the time you've looked up in the sky for an hour, you'll find a crisscross pattern across the whole of the sky. But that's not because these aircraft have been in those different locations. The aircraft are only flying on the airways. It's the wind that's blowing the contrail away from that ground track of that airway and forming this grid pattern. And that's why you get these grid patterns. So
it's not to do with flight paths?
No. Right. You don't get airways stacked next to each other like this. Very, very rarely do you get parallel airways. This is only one airway. So this aircraft, judging by the looks of it, is on the left is the airway. So this is the airway. And after 10 minutes, the contrail will move here, slightly to the right. After another 10 minutes, it'll move to the right again. But of course, this airway on the left will have an aircraft flying down that airway every 5 or 10 minutes. So another aircraft will then fly across this airway, and that contrail will move down here, and then down here, and then down here. And then another aircraft will fly on that same airway. So it's multiple aircraft flying down the same airway, and the contrail for each one being blown downwind. And that is what forms the grid pattern. So you need strong winds and a contrail that persists. So this contrail has got to persist for at least half an hour or more in order to get this pattern. Because normally on an airway, you'll get an aircraft every 5 or 10 minutes. So to have 1, 2, 3, 4 contrails, that's at least sort of half an hour. And then you've got another airway going over here, of course. I'm not sure where the primary airway is. It's probably this one down the bottom here. And then the wind is pushing it up this way. So where would the wind be coming from? The wind would be coming from, for instance, the bottom left and pushing up to the top right. And therefore it'll push this contrail in this direction and this contrail in that direction. So that's why you get these different patterns sometimes. So again, it's nothing particularly special. This is an interesting one. You don't get this very often. And again, people will say, "What on earth's going on there?" You know,
that looks like a World War II fight between a Spitfire and a Messerschmitt or something.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Two explanations for this. This is either an aircraft in the holding pattern, waiting to go in. Now that doesn't happen very often. And again, it's one aircraft going round. So this is not multiple aircraft. This is one aircraft going round and round and round. But of course, at each time it goes round the pattern, the contrail is pushed off by the wind. In this case, I think to the left. So the holding pattern I think they're in is here, and then each time they go round, the contrail is being pushed further and further to the left, and that's why you end up with these multiple patterns. Now, this doesn't happen very often because normally we don't hold at high altitude, so you won't hold at altitudes where you'll be contrailing. Now, this is winter. The trees don't have any leaves, so you might be contrailing a little bit lower. I think I've only ever been held at contrailing altitudes in a holding pattern about 3 times in 30 years of fast jet flying. Because normally you're much lower down and you won't be contrailing. So it's very rare to be held up at 25,000 foot or more in the holding pattern. It doesn't happen very often. It only happens if you've got a whole stack of aircraft underneath you, and each holding pattern is only 1,000 foot different from the one below it. If you're holding up at 28,000 foot, you must have something like 25 aircraft underneath you, all going around the same pattern. And that doesn't happen very often. I mean, really, that only happens if you have maybe an airfield closure. You know, if an airfield is closed by snow or something, or as happened with Heathrow and their computer went down and they couldn't accept any aircraft, then you might have people up at high altitude contrailing. The other possibility is this, and I have seen this on 2 occasions, the Air Force doing in-flight refueling. Now, in America, you might just go in a straight line because that's easier for the aircraft following. But in Europe, our airspace is rather crowded. And I have seen tankers with fighters on the wingtips refueling. And they're refueling in a holding pattern. So they don't drift out into other people's airspace, basically. And so they're in a nice holding pattern, going round and round this holding pattern while they've got fighters coming up and refueling off their tanks. So that's stuff. Yeah, that's what that is. What else have we got? We've got colored. We've got colored contrails. That's always interesting, and people say, well, you've got to have chemicals in that because otherwise why would it be like that? Well, it's just a rainbow, basically. It's the same as we've seen before with these luminescent clouds. So this will be in the morning or the evening, and it's catching the rays of the sun obliquely and reflecting them back down again, and you can basically see a rainbow. And that'll again be ice crystals up at high altitude. This is a nice one. This is and this confuses people because you've only got 2 contrails from a 4-engine aircraft, and that causes some confusion. But this is the wing that's doing this. If you look at the back of the wing, you can see 4 contrails. But of course, the wing is producing an enormous great swirl pattern. That's how aircraft fly. Aircraft fly by forcing air downwards. I like to shock other pilots because they all say it's because of the Bernoulli theorem. There is a low pressure on the top of the wing. Yeah, well, there is, of course, but that is consequential. That's not necessarily causal. What an aircraft wing is doing is it's forcing air downwards. So it's action and reaction. And if you force air downwards, then the aircraft has a reaction which is staying upwards, which is how an aircraft flies. But in order to fly, therefore, you must have down-flowing air from the back of the aircraft. That's the action and reaction. So air must be going down rapidly at the back of the aircraft, caused by the wing. And that causes a big rotation. And we'll see evidence of that later. You get these big vortices coming off the back of the wing, which swirl around. And that is what's joining these 2 contrails together and forming this big single cloud at the back, one great vortex, which is caused by the swirl coming off the back of the wing. Concorde was good at displaying these swirls. In fact, here you can see it swirling around on this one, coming off the back of this 747. Is that a 747 or an A380? Anyway, it's a big aircraft. And here you'll see some of these swirling patterns. Again, this is confused with some sort of spray gear or something. This is a 757, and the 757 was notorious for this. And this has nothing to do with the engines. As you can see behind the engines, it's perfectly clear. This is just vortices coming off the back of the flaps, which is why you see it coming off this junction between the wing and the flaps. And the 757 was renowned for this. It was one of the few aircraft that always produced this. And these vortices are very coherent. They can actually, this only happens at low level. So this is only happening on landing. This is not at high altitude. So you will see aircraft coming in on the approach, and they will be trailing these snakes behind them. And these snakes will actually fall to the ground, and they'll wriggle around on the ground in amongst the grass at the beginning of the runway. Because they actually, vortices are very coherent. They will stay together. You've probably seen divers in the sea blowing air bubbles, no, not bubbles, air rings. And sometimes you'll even see dolphins and whales blowing these rings. There's quite a few videos about them. But they'll blow a ring, and that ring will stay as a cohesive ring all the way up to the surface. Vortices are very good at that. They actually stay together. They don't dissipate very quickly. And that's what it's doing here. So this vortex coming off the back of the flaps, because a vortex has a low pressure in the center of the vortex, that's what a vortex is all about, it will condense the air. All you need to do to condense the air is reduce its pressure, which reduces its temperature, and the air will condense. Of course, that only happens when you've got very humid air. And as you can see below, it's got like low-level fog or something down below, you can see. So it's obviously a very humid day here. We've got, the conditions are ripe for fog. And in fact, on the top of the wing, you can see mist forming on the top of the wing as well, because of the low pressure on the top of the wing. So that's not caused by the engine, that's caused by the wing. And that's why you get this. This is the back of a DC-10. So that dates the picture. We haven't had DC-10s for quite some time. The whole of the back of the wing is invisible because of the low pressure over the top of the wing. So it's condensing out the atmosphere. Again, you can see this is a humid day because there's like fog down below. You can see a fog bank. On the join between the flaps and the wing, you can see again these trails. So obviously the DC-10 was another one that used to send out vortices. And he's even got a little tiny vortex coming off the wingtips. They've put wing fences on the end of these wings. So this is an updated DC-10. They were never built with these on the end. This must be a modification. But again, this is not contrailing from the engine. This is just condensation because of the low pressure caused by the top of the wing, caused by these vortexes coming off the flaps and off the wingtips. So again, this aircraft is coming into land. Obviously, it's got the gear down. This is in the lower atmosphere when it's very, very moist. Perhaps going into, a tropical airport. Obviously, it's very humid sometimes there, or in the northern hemisphere in the autumn and so on when it's very, very moist. And we get a lot of contrailing. This is a nice one. This is an aircraft flying through stratus. And you can see we were talking about descending air coming from the aircraft. The whole point of a wing is to make air go downwards. If the air is going downwards, that's an action, and the reaction is the aircraft staying upwards. And that air flowing down forms these lovely vortices. So there's a sort of stratus layer up the top here, and it's just dragging that air from this stratus layer and forcing it downwards. You don't see this very often. This is quite a unique photo. Doesn't happen very often.
I'm guessing. Sorry, Ralph. I'm guessing you wouldn't want to fly directly through that, would you?
Well, this is the problem. This is why we have wake separation. So aircraft have to be separated on approach by 2 minutes or 5 miles, because you want this to dissipate before you fly through it. Now, it depends on the size of the aircraft, because obviously the size of this vortex depends on how big the aircraft is. So a medium to medium, like a 737 to a 737, is not really a problem. But if you have a heavy in front, which is why all heavy aircraft have to have that in their call sign. So if it's a heavy aircraft, they will say Speedbird 123 heavy to alert the air traffic control and everybody else that this is a big aircraft. And a big aircraft is basically a 767 and above. So the big wide body twins, anything bigger than that, that size or bigger, is a heavy. And they do produce quite a lot of turbulence behind them, which a smaller aircraft might have problems with. So if you're in a little bizjet coming behind this, you might get a severe amount of turbulence out of this. And it might almost try and turn you upside down. If you're in a Cessna, you've got no chance behind this. So if you're in a Cessna coming behind this, you want to be well behind it. Never mind 5 miles, you want to be 10 or 15 miles behind it, because this is going to cause problems for a Cessna. So yeah, we do have these wake turbulence limits for takeoff, because it can be a problem on takeoff as well. So we have a 2-minute regulation for takeoff, and for approach when it's normally 5 miles. I think for the A380, I think that went up to 7 miles for the 3 miles medium to medium, 5 miles for a heavy, and I think it went up to 7 miles for an A380 because it's such a big aircraft. I'm not sure if they've changed that or not. And here's a nice one. You can see the descending air off the back of the aircraft again. This is a Russian Bear with the big contra-rotating turboprops on the front of it. An enormous great beast this thing is. Military aircraft, of course. And it's flying over the top of this stratus layer. And because of the descending air that comes off the back of the wing, it's descending through this stratus layer, taking the stratus layer with it. And because it's warming up, obviously as the air descends, it warms. It's dissipating the cloud. The cloud basically, as it were, melts. It dissipates. It evaporates as it goes down. And so you get this trail. And it's probably doing this deliberately. I mean, pilots do this sort of thing just for a bit of fun sometimes, especially military pilots when they don't have to conform to, standard regulations. And they'll fly along the top of a stratus cloud and see if they can play around with it. So that's very interesting.
Okay, Ralph, we're approaching the hour-and-a-half mark now. I should just say that I'm at this stage very convinced that I got it wrong for the last 25 years. So I don't want it to stretch out into too long a video.
Well, I've not got many to go on with, so these are about the last ones. So
okay.
This is just, something, because you said at the beginning, people say that, contrailing has got worse and worse, it must be something nefarious. this is 1945, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and these are all contrailing, of course. Now, this only started in like 1943 or something like that, because prior to that, these aircraft couldn't get up high enough. It only really started when some of these bombers started getting up beyond 20,000 foot, beyond 25,000 foot into the contrailing regions. And then they started contrailing. And that's when people started noticing this more and more.
Mm.
And so you started getting all of these images of aircraft that were, and this is contrailing in two ways. This is the props are causing this. So this is not from the engines so much. This is the propellers, and that's why you see these banded stripes. So this must be somewhere really humid. This used to happen down in the tropics with the Americans fighting out in the Pacific. And you'll see these contrails coming off the tip vortices, basically coming off the propeller. And they will, like a vortex, will lower the pressure and therefore lower the temperature, and it'll condense, and you get these lovely swirl patterns coming off the back of them. So yeah, people have been contrailing. This is a more modern one with a search and rescue aircraft with vortices coming off the propellers. So yeah, this started happening from the 1940s onwards, and we've been contrailing ever since. And then you get things like this. People mistake things like this. What's this aircraft doing? He's got stuff coming out of the back of it. This is the APU, basically. If you get a hot start on an APU, the APU is an auxiliary power unit which sits at the back of the aircraft. It's a little jet engine. If it doesn't start properly, it'll throw a load of smoke out the back of the aircraft. And so quite often you see this, and people will point to these aircraft and they'll say, hey, look, they've got a smoke generator out the back of the aircraft.
I had a Cortina like that once upon a time. Carry on.
Yeah, I did as well. Yeah, we had Cortina Mark 1. It was well known for it. That was a good car, that was. Americans won't know the Cortina Mark 1. It was like a four-seater saloon car made by Ford, and it was very popular in the 1960s. But it did tend to smoke quite a lot. And that is about all of the pictures I've got. So I don't know if there's
I've got one picture I want to show you.
Yeah, sure. Well,
I'll
stop sharing. Yeah.
Because I did have about 7 or 8 images lined up, but I think you've just about covered all of them bar one. So I'll show you the one. For me, this is the most convincing kind of image for chemtrails, because we see quite a few contrails there, but more than that, we see a very hazy kind of fog covering the whole sky. Now, many people say that you see these contrails in the morning and gradually they build up, and then quite often the day will start out with a clear blue sky, then these contrails turn up, and before you know it, you end up with this awful kind of almost metallic looking haze going across the sky. Now, what's going on there, Ralph?
Yeah, well, this has been a concern, not for chemtrailing reasons, but for, as it were, geoengineering reasons, because does this affect the climate? I mean, this is just contrail spreading out. You can see they're spreading out because, I mean, here's a fresh contrail with a new aircraft going across the top. Here's a recent contrail. But if you look at these two, this one is spread out all over the place from here to here. One contrail is spread out. This one is spread out from here to here. So they're really spreading out today. And another one here spread out from there to there. So this must be a very humid day at altitude, which doesn't happen that often. Remember, the high altitudes are normally quite dry because they're cold, and therefore, cold air is dry air. So it's not normally this humid at altitude. But here, the contrails are spreading out all over the place. And the fear was, of course, that this would cause reflection of the sun and therefore cause global dimming.
Which happens to be what they're kind of purporting to do in the future.
Yes, this is what idiots like the
Gates.
Microsoft guy, Bill Gates, are trying to do. Crazy thing, shouldn't be interfering.
No.
Because, well, we've already been through my climate paper and so on, which shows that CO2 is not the problem that they are trying to sell. But also, I don't know if this one is coming up, if you can accept this one, coming up on a screen share. Yeah. So this is global dimming. Now, people actually thought this was a problem caused by aircraft contrails reflecting away the sunlight, and therefore we've got global dimming, therefore we'll have global cooling. And this is what they actually thought back in, you remember the 1970s when they said we're going to enter a new ice age? They thought some of this was due to contrails, because this graph is a graph of surface solar radiation, the amount of sunlight that is hitting the ground. And there was global dimming. It was actually getting lower and lower. You can see from here is 1950, and it was going down and down and down to sort of 1985. There was less and less sunlight hitting the ground. And that was a concern because, is it these aircraft reflecting all of the sunlight away? But then, of course, it started going back up again. So from 1985 onwards, it's been steadily increasing again, and we've gone all the way back to what we had before. And this is the current level here, 2020, I think, the end of this graph. So it wasn't aircraft at all that was doing this. It was actually sulfur dioxide. So what happened in 1985 to reverse this? Well, this is when we had the acid rain scare. So yeah, man can affect the environment if we're not careful about it. And we had this acid rain scare where the trees and forests across Scandinavia were all dying because of acid rain. But that acid rain was coming out of power stations, not aircraft. And the power stations were out emitting sulfur dioxide. And that's why we had this scare in the 1980s, and they put scrubbers on all of the power stations to take out the sulfur dioxide. And if we look at this chart here, we see the effects of physical drivers of climate change. Well, that's a bit, this is what sort of effects these different things will have on the atmosphere. Now, they've got carbon dioxide as being a big warming agent. Well, I would cut that by 2/3. It's only a small warming agent. But anyway, we can go into that again later. And then you've got methane, nitrous oxide. Nitrogen oxide's a slight cooling. It's on the other side of the line. This is a slight cooling. And then we go down here, sulfur dioxide, a huge cooling effect from sulfur dioxide because it can reflect sunlight away. They call it sulfur dioxide is little mirrors in the atmosphere. So sulfur dioxide is a real problem. But the sulfur dioxide was coming from electrical generation, not from aircraft. Aircraft don't put out very much sulfur dioxide. They're fairly clean burners as burners go.
I'm pretty sure it's sulfur dioxide that Bill Gates wants to use. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was going to do it in order to cool down because he thinks we've got global warming. I don't think the global warming is half as bad, not even a quarter as bad as they keep saying. So his idea was, we put sulfur dioxide up in the atmosphere and then it'll reflect away the sunlight. But of course, we had this problem in the 80s and it was causing acid rain. So I'm not entirely sure what he fancies doing with that. But I think it's a bad idea. But if we look down the bottom, we've got aviation contrails and they've got virtually no change. I think that's wrong, actually, because what they've done to get no change for aviation contrails is they've added in the carbon dioxide, which is a warming agent, and therefore it's negated the contrails, which are actually a cooling agent, because the contrails reflect away the sunlight during the day. And so they are, in fact, a cooling agent. But I think they're more cooling than they are warming. Because if we take out the CO2, if CO2 is not the problem that they're advertising, if it's not as effective as they keep saying, then on average, contrails in the sky will actually be a cooling agent. So they're actually good if you think global warming is a problem. Regards the sulfur dioxide, this is what we had. So this is global sulfur dioxide emissions. And as you can see, sulfur dioxide went up enormously up until 1980. And then these new regulations came in and they started going down ever since. Now that's up to 2010. And for some reason, it runs off the graph here for our world in data. So we have to go onto this to look on a separate chart, which goes from 1990 up until more recent times. And again, you can see from 100%, it's gone down. Well, United Kingdom has gone down 90%, mainly because we've closed down all of our industry, which is not a good idea, but there we go. The OECD countries in the United States have come down like 80%, which is pretty good. You know, we've prevented most of the sulfur dioxide getting into the atmosphere. The only one that hasn't, although I suppose they're trying now, is China, where it stayed much, much higher for, this is China emissions of sulfur dioxide. It stayed much higher for much longer in China. And they've now only from like 2014 onwards have they really started to try and cut down on the amount of sulfur dioxide. And the other one, which they've only just got to grips with, is shipping, because shipping was like 10% of, never mind aircraft, you know, stop looking up at the sky. The real problem was ships, because they were burning that filthy bunker fuel, which is like tar. I mean, it's solid. If you can imagine a solid fuel, to actually get it from the bunkers into the engines, they actually have to warm it up to make it melt so they can put it into the engine. I mean, it really is grotesque stuff.
Crikey.
And ships were putting out 10% of the sulfur dioxide was coming out of ships.
Wow.
And it was banned, but it was not banned until 2017. And this is shipping sulfur emissions. And you can see it went up to a peak in 2005, 2006. And this is when the new regulation came in and it dropped off the edge of a cliff. And so we've now eradicated most of the sulfur dioxide from shipping. So yeah, aircraft are not the big problem. The problem was shipping and electrical generation. So I'll end that.
Yeah. Okay. I wish we'd had this conversation 20 years ago, Ralph. It would have saved me a lot of bother and anxiety. It's
actually, because people will mention it, I will go back to this and just give you a quick screen share again, because if I go my window and share again, if I can share that again. The one thing we didn't address is there is some, there we go. Here is cloud seeding. So there are people who will actually go out and chemtrail. And here is a chemtrailer, guilty as charged. And you can see he's got these fireworks on the back of his aircraft for dropping, I think it's, aluminium particles or something onto clouds. Now, this is pretty specific. So this is not standard contrailing that you see every day in the sky above. This only works on cumulus clouds. and it only works at lower level. So you've got to have clouds in the sky, visible cumulus clouds. And the idea is you can go up along those cumulus clouds, go in them or slightly above them, and you set off these fireworks on the back of this aircraft and drop them into the cloud. The idea being that you make it rain. Now, the only place I think they do this now is California.
I think they've tried it in Australia as well, pretty sure.
Yeah, they tried it in Oz a little bit, and China tried it during the Olympics, not to make it rain on the Olympics, but to make it rain elsewhere, much to the upset of various other people, so that it was dry over the Olympics. And so, yeah, this is what they do. But this is very specific. It only works if you've got a cumulus cloud that's already there. And all it can do is make it rain. It can't do anything else. It's not terribly effective because the cloud has to be just at the right point of precipitation before this will work. So yeah, you do get some cloud seeders.
Have you heard of? Sorry, have you heard of Operation Cumulus?
No, I haven't heard of that one. No.
So on August the 15th, 1952, one of the worst ever flash floods to have occurred in Britain swept through the Devon village of Lynmouth. 35 people died as a torrent of 90 million tons of water and thousands of tons of rock poured off Exmoor and into the village, causing utter devastation. Now, the disaster was officially termed the hand of God, but half a century later, new evidence from previously classified government files has revealed that Operation Cumulus, an experiment with artificial rainmaking conducted by the RAF, took place in the same area and at the same time as the flash floods in Lynmouth. And that's a fact.
Yeah, I've heard of this. I've not researched it. I would be slightly skeptical because why would you want to make it rain over Exmoor? There is no gain on making it rain over Exmoor.
I think it was just an experiment in trying to make it rain.
Yeah, I suppose
1952.
if you're experimenting. Yeah, so that would be the very first time it would have been tried. I'm surprised that you could make that amount of rain. I mean, normally what you're doing by seeding a thundercloud is you're making it do what it would do naturally, but would do somewhere else. I mean, the whole point of doing this is you want the rain here and not over there. So you want to make it rain earlier than it would otherwise do. Or you want to make a cloud rain that was not going to rain otherwise. You know, it was on the point of raining, but it didn't quite rain, and you want to force it into raining. So what you're essentially getting is a thunderstorm. You're not necessarily getting a super thunderstorm that is, 10 times bigger than a normal one, because you're just seeding a normal cloud. That area that because they had another flood, didn't they, back in the 90s in the same area? Was it Lynmouth again? I think they had a natural flood there. So that is an area that does flood naturally. And they had this big flood in the 90s as well, where because it all drains off the same highlands and it all goes down the same river straight into the sea, because Lynmouth is a coastal village. And yeah, if you get enough water on Exmoor, it'll all run off down Lynmouth. But you're not going to get a super storm, as far as I can see, by seeding a cloud. You're just going to get a normal thunderstorm. But a normal thunderstorm running off Exmoor can cause problems, of course.
Yeah, sure.
So one presumes that the RAF never tried it again. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, who knows? Okay, we're an hour and 3/4 in now, so I think we'll start to close. I just want to say thank you for sharing your expertise on this subject. It's as we've mentioned previously, it's a much talked about subject, and it's something that's puzzled me for the best part of 2 decades now. I'm fairly convinced, having listened to your presentation, that it's largely bogus, I would say now, that the chemtrail theory. I do think that they would love to geo-engineer the skies for their own means and benefit or whatever, but much of what we see that goes on in the sky can be explained as contrails, as Ralph has done today. So, and I think it's very important that when you believe in when you start to believe in something, and it's very important to engage with the other side of the argument, you know, because some people on our side of the fence, they get fixated on certain theories and they cannot budge, you know, they cannot be persuaded no matter how much evidence is presented to them. I'm obviously thinking about flat earthers here as well. So it's very important that when we go down these rabbit holes, that we listen to both sides of the argument. Would you concur, Ralph?
Yes. Well, I thought this was important because I've started, as you know, all of these talks. I do talks around the countryside now about net zero and the ineptitude of our government in pressing ahead with net zero when they don't even know the ramifications of it, that it will never work in the way they've advertised it. So I'm talking to these communities who are receptive to being critical of net zero, being skeptical, being, as it were, conspiracy theorists about net zero. But the trouble is, half of the people I'm talking to believe in chemtrails, and 20% of them believe in a flat Earth. Now, that's a problem to me because it makes these talks easy to dismiss, because people will say, oh, well, he's just talking to chemtrailers, you know, what do they know? So it makes my task much more difficult. And that's why I want to put this out to the people who genuinely follow the skepticism of net zero, because I mean, it really is an absolute mess what they're trying to propose. It'll never work in the manner that they are proposing.
And
but I
it's
don't want it
dangerous as well.
Yeah, for the economy and everything. Yes, it's hugely dangerous for the economy. You know, you might end up with blackouts all over the place, you know, because we won't have enough energy. But it makes the argument much harder if a lot of people are jumping onto the chemtrailing bandwagon at the same time. So, I mean, there are good conspiracy theories and there are bad ones, and we've got to choose between the good and the bad.
Absolutely.
You know, I went along with the conspiracy theory as it was at the time about wet markets and laboratories in Wuhan. Now, at the time, I was an outsider, you know, because, you know, the media was pushing it and everyone was joining along and nobody was being skeptical. And yet we were right. We've been proven right in the fullness of time. And so if you're going to be skeptical, you've got to really choose. And of course, it's not easy to decide sometimes what is a good conspiracy and what's a bad one.
And it could be very time consuming for people as well when they've got busy lives, you know. Going down these rabbit holes can take literally weeks sometimes. And, you know, so, yeah, there's.
And who do you believe? You see, the majority of people, they've put their trust in the media, in the BBC and people of this nature, and they're still trusting of these people, despite them telling lies constantly for years. And yeah, as you say, they can't investigate this material themselves, so they're trusting on these reputable authorities. And what I want to do is put myself forward as being more reliable than the media. So I want everything I'm saying to be based on, whether I'm doing, you know, climate research or whether I'm doing sort of historical research, everything to be based on the truth as we know it, so that people build up a trust in what I'm saying. So when they hear me talk about this, I hope they are in a position that they can trust me. And then when I talk about the deficiencies of net zero, I hope they'll trust me on that as well, because that is important. It's more important than this, but I don't want it to be sidetracked. The net zero has the capability of bringing down civilizations if we're not careful. You know, if we run out of energy as a highly technical civilization, if we run out of energy, we go back to the Stone Age very, very, very quickly. If we don't have cheap, reliable, consistent supplies of energy that can run the entire economy, not just a little bit of the economy, but the entire economy. And some people, I think, don't realize how much energy we are using. We are using prodigious amounts of energy. China, for instance, is using 4.6 billion tons of coal every year. 4.6 billion. I heard someone say, and I must go and check this, that is 15 times more coal than Britain produced since the Industrial Revolution. And they're burning that every year.
Wow.
So our contribution via coal to whatever's in the atmosphere is microscopic in comparison with what China is doing. That is how much energy we are using. That's why we've got to tread very carefully when we want to go from that reliable energy onto what they want to do with renewables. We've got to be very careful about that. And I don't want my message to be contaminated, as it were, too much by discussions about flat earths and chemtrails. So that's why I think this is important. So I hope people, and if people have questions, you know, ask the questions. This is, you know, it's going to be out on YouTube. There's going to be a question and answer session down the bottom. Come on there, ask your questions, see what we can discuss about this.
Please do, and please share this video as well, because the information is very, very important at the moment. So get your comments in, please share. Thank you, Ralph, for all you're doing at the moment. It's very important work. We really appreciate it. And we'll speak soon on another video.
Good to be with you.
Yeah. Cheers, Ralph. Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.